You think you know Blackbeard. Everyone does. The most famous pirate who ever lived. The terrifying silhouette. The beard lit on fire to look like a demon rising from the sea. His image is on rum bottles, in theme parks, in 100 movies and novels and video games. He is the pirate, the archetype, the definition, and almost everything you think you know about him is wrong. The real Edward Teach was neither the towering monster of legend nor the simple brute of Hollywood. He was something much more interesting and much more dangerous. A man who understood, before almost anyone else, that power isn't what you have, it's what people believe you have. And Eiichiro Oda understood that perfectly. Because Marshall D. Teach, Blackbeard, the villain of One Piece, is built on exactly that same idea. Let's find the real man behind the myth. In One Piece, Blackbeard is unique. Every major villain has a clear ideology, absolute justice, noble bloodlines, evolutionary superiority. Teach is different. His philosophy is almost nihilistic. Dreams are real. Power belongs to whoever takes it, and the rules that bind other people simply do not apply to him. He is the only character in One Piece canon to wield 2 devil fruits, something supposedly impossible. He breaks the rules of the world itself, and he came from nothing. No noble birth, no secret lineage, no inherited power, just ambition and patience. Extraordinary, decades-long patience. That is exactly who the real Edward Teach was. Here is the first problem with Blackbeard's legend. We know almost nothing about his early life. The name Edward Teach, sometimes spelled Thatch, Tatch, or Theach, appears in historical records only around 1716. Before that, almost nothing. He was probably born in Bristol, England, sometime between 1680 and 1690. He may have served as a privateer during the War of the Spanish Succession, fighting legally under a government commission, attacking enemy ships for profit. When the war ended in 1713, like so many sailors of his generation, he found himself skilled, experienced, and suddenly unemployed. He drifted toward the Caribbean, and in 1716, he fell in with a pirate named Benjamin Hornigold, one of the most significant figures of the golden age of piracy, and a man who would become Teach's mentor. Hornigold recognized something in Teach immediately, not just physical courage, though Teach had that in abundance, something rarer. Teach understood performance. He understood that a pirate's greatest weapon isn't firepower, it isn't speed, it isn't even violence, it's reputation. And reputation, he realized, could be manufactured. Let's talk about the beard. Edward Teach had, by all accounts, an extraordinary black beard. Thick, long, wild. In an era where most men were clean-shaven or wore modest facial hair, it was immediately striking. But Teach didn't just grow it, he weaponized it. Before battle, or more accurately, before the moment he wanted a merchant ship to surrender without a fight, he would braid the beard into thick ropes, weave slow-burning cannon fuses into the braids, and light them. In the darkness, in the smoke of approaching cannon fire, a figure would appear at the bow of his ship. Face wreathed in smoke, eyes burning, moving slowly and deliberately, like something that had climbed up from hell. Most ships surrendered immediately. That was the point. This is the detail that separates Teach from almost every other pirate of his era. He was not primarily a fighter. He was a director. His entire operation was a carefully staged performance designed to make violence unnecessary, because violence is slow, expensive, and damages the cargo you're trying to steal. Contemporary accounts suggest that Teach rarely killed without reason. He was brutal when he needed to be, genuinely brutal. But the horror show presentation was engineering. not personality. He wanted compliance. The Demon Act delivered it. This also reveals something important. The real Blackbeard was highly intelligent. Intelligent enough to build a persona so effective that it has survived 3 centuries intact. In 1717, at his peak, Teach commanded a flagship called the Queen Anne's Revenge, a converted French slave ship carrying 40 cannons, and a fleet of supporting vessels totaling around 400 men. He was powerful, he was feared, he was wealthy, but he was also part of something larger. Nassau, in the Bahamas, had become what historians sometimes call the Republic of Pirates, a genuine experiment in self-governance outside the reach of any European empire. At its height, Nassau housed over 1,000 pirates and operated by its own rules. Democratic voting on captains, equal shares of plunder, medical care for the wounded. This is not the image of piracy that popular culture gives us. These were men, and some women, who had opted out of a society that offered them nothing and built an alternative. Teach moved in and out of Nassau. He was never a pure ideologue. He was too pragmatic for that. But he understood the value of the network, the shared information, the collective protection. He also, in 1718, made a fateful decision. He accepted a royal pardon. The British Crown, increasingly desperate to end the pirate problem in the Caribbean, offered amnesty to any pirate who surrendered. Teach accepted, then immediately returned to piracy. He used the pardon as a reset, a brief moment of legal cover while he planned his next moves. It bought him a few months, not much more. By the autumn of 1718, Teach had based himself at Ocracoke Island on the North Carolina coast. He had cultivated a complex relationship with the colonial governor of North Carolina, Charles Eden, who turned a blind eye to piracy in exchange for a share of the plunder. It was corruption at the highest level of colonial administration, and it had kept Teach relatively safe for months. But the governor of Virginia, Alexander Spotswood, had had enough. Spotswood had no jurisdiction over the waters where Teach operated, but he didn't let that stop him. He secretly commissioned 2 Royal Navy sloops under the command of Lieutenant Robert Maynard and sent them south, outside his legal authority, outside his territory, operating in what was essentially a covert assassination mission. Maynard found Teach at Ocracoke on November 21st, 1718. The battle the following morning is one of the most documented and most debated in pirate history. The fight is close, brutal, and nearly goes wrong for Maynard. At one point, Teach's men board Maynard's sloop, and for a few minutes, it looks like the pirate is going to win. Then, Maynard's hidden sailors emerge from below decks. What follows is described in detail by the men who were there. Teach fights on, taking wound after wound. Gunshot, sword cuts, more gunshots. He keeps moving, keeps fighting. The accounts say he received 5 bullet wounds and approximately 20 sword cuts before he finally fell. The version that has entered legend says he was still fighting when his throat was cut, that his body kept moving even after the fatal wound, that it took the violence of an execution to stop him. Some of this is probably embellishment. Maynard had every reason to make the story impressive. He was reporting to a governor who had sent him on an illegal mission. But some of it may be true. What is documented? Maynard cut off Teach's head and hung it from his bowsprit, the front of the ship, and sailed back to Virginia with it as proof. Edward Teach was dead at approximately 35 to 38 years old. He had been a major pirate for barely 2 years. 2 years. The most famous pirate in history had an active career shorter than most people's college degree. Everything else is legend. Legend? He built himself. The obvious connections between real Blackbeard and Marshall D. Teach are right there in the name. Edward Teach, Marshall D. Teach. Oda isn't hiding this one. but the deeper connection is more interesting. The real Blackbeard's greatest skill was not violence. It was the performance of invincibility. He made people believe he was unstoppable before the first shot was fired. Marshall D. Teach does exactly the same thing throughout One Piece. He calculates, he waits, he lets other people fight the battles while he positions himself perfectly. He appears at exactly the right moment, seemingly unstoppable, seemingly inevitable. Both men understood the same truth. The most powerful force in any conflict isn't physical strength. It's the belief in your enemy's minds that you cannot be beaten. There's one more parallel worth sitting with. The real Blackbeard operated for 2 years. 2 years of chaos that changed the entire Caribbean. In One Piece, Teach is patient for decades, waiting, watching, building. Oda understood something about the historical Blackbeard that most people miss. The legend was bigger than the man. And Marshall D. Teach, more than any other character in One Piece, is a legend that has grown larger than anyone can control, including perhaps Oda himself. Edward Teach, 2 years of piracy, 3 centuries of legend, the most famous pirate who ever lived, and one of the shortest careers in the Golden Age. That's the real Blackbeard. Next episode. She was barely 16 years old when she disguised herself as a man and boarded a pirate ship. She fought alongside the most feared pirates of the Caribbean, and when those pirates surrendered without a fight, she was the one standing on deck, sword in hand, screaming at them to keep fighting. Her name was Anne Bonny, and she is far more interesting than the story you've been told. One Piece is fiction, but the pirates who inspired it were very, very real. Their stories didn't disappear. They became echoes of the Grand Line.